Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Tiffany Mink, Marketing Manager for Interview Valet here. And I'm so excited to be bringing you the second part in our foundational series for podcast guesting. And that is the 9 key components to the perfect podcast one sheet. Now, if you joined us last week, you saw that we talked about the 9 secrets to getting booked on your first podcast. Um, where we covered the things that you need to know that maybe you didn't consider about getting booked on a podcast, how to get started in podcast guesting, and that then today's topic just naturally is as a natural progression into that discussion, because the having a professional one sheet was actually one of the 9 secrets to getting booked. So we kind of glazed over that last week, but really it's something that deserves its own focus, its own discussion. So that's what we're going to do here today. And in addition to covering the 9 key components of the perfect podcast one sheet, we're also going to talk about what to avoid. We're going to show examples of what to avoid and why. And then later, one of our own team members, Claudia, will be joining us. She is a podcast relationship manager and then also one of our master one sheet designers for our clients. And so for that reason, I really think she can bring value to the discussion from both sides of it. From our client standpoint, who she so expertly puts the one sheets together, makes them sound amazing, features all of their expertise and their uniqueness and the value that they can provide to podcast hosts and their listeners. And then also she works with podcast hosts, right? So she gets firsthand feedback on, what they appreciate and value and what they need to see and hear from a guest to make them want to say yes to them. So with that, let's dive right in. So before we talk about the podcast one sheet, we should really talk about why podcast guesting, who is podcast guesting for, right? And it really goes down to what is your goal? What is your objective? What is your business model, right? It's for anyone whose customer requires know, like, and trust. Anyone that it's a high touch service, right? Coaches, consultants, nonfiction authors, brands, corporations, Fortune 500 companies, anything where you're very involved with your customer, where it matters if your objectives, your mission, your values kind of align, anything like that. And also any high ticket sales, right? Where the sales process takes a little bit more of that know, like, and trust for them to decide to work with you, right? Where that decision-making process is a little bit more intense for your customer. So that's really who we're focusing on. That's who the podcast one sheet that we're going to be talking about is kind of geared toward. And then another thing to address before we dig in is to identify what podcast hosts are not, right? What we're talking about here today is focused solely around podcast guesting and interviewing on podcasts. We're not talking about other medias, right? We're not talking about getting on TV. We're not talking about being a keynote speaker, doing live presentations, speaking at events. This is specifically for becoming a podcast guest. So with that in mind, there's 2 things hosts typically are not. They are typically not trained journalists. So, and that's why it is a podcast one sheet, not a media kit, right? If you send them a 10-page media kit, you're giving them 9 pages to say no to, right? You want to make it quick and easy for them. Another thing podcast hosts typically don't have that maybe those in on TV and film do is they don't have a large team. So if you're seeking to get on NPR or Good Morning America or ABC, something like that, they have a large staff of people. So when you're sending their media kit, you're probably kind of starting toward the bottom, and then it will work its way up through the ranks. And there's a whole decision-making process for that. Again, going back to journalists, they need to know more information about you. But podcast hosts, typically, if you're sending your one sheet in or you're sending an introduction in, it's probably going to the host or maybe, their assistant or their producer, something like that. But it's a much smaller staff structure that, again, you're wanting to make it easy for them. And, they're also busy. They're not going to spend a lot of time mulling this over. You're thinking they are getting hundreds of these in their inbox a week. If they open up your one sheet and it's 10 pages long, immediately they're going to, just dismiss it and move on to the next, because they're not going to spend a lot of time. You want to make it be a quick yes or no for them. And so that really leads us into the common thread throughout this discussion is about making it easy for them to say yes to you as a guest. Just focusing on the goal and the purpose, right? We're going to talk about giving them everything they need to say yes, and eliminating the things that don't matter, that aren't relevant, and the things that will make it easy for them to say no, right? How to avoid those. And then how do we know this? Well, we've been doing this a long time. Interview Valet has been around for 9 years with more than 1,500 certified podcast guests who've gone on more than 75,000 interviews and more than 200 million podcast listens, right? So we've seen what works. We value and pride ourselves in being a people-driven company backed by data. We intensely track everything to determine what drives success and what derails it, right? From both the client, our guest perspective, and also the host perspective. And another stat that should be included in this, that's also very important to this discussion, is we also have relationships with thousands of podcast hosts. We really value their opinion and their feedback on what makes it easy for them. And many of our hosts actually have said to us that they immediately, because they are trained to identify our one sheet and what it looks like in our process, that it makes it easier for them to say yes, just for the simple fact of we have designed a system and they know what to expect from us, and it cuts out all the fluff for them in the middle. So everything that we share in these discussions is focused around our data and what we have attributed to driving results. So it's not just based on our opinion or what we feel like looks good or a nice and aesthetically pleasing one sheet. It's based on direct feedback from industry leaders on both sides of the spectrum. And with that, we're going to dive into the nine key components. And we're going to use this throughout this example. We're going to use our own founder here, Tom Schwab. This is his one sheet right now that he is currently using. So shout out to Tom, and thank you for being a good sport and letting me talk about you throughout this discussion. And so with that, we're going to start on the left-hand side here and work our way down the left column of the one sheet, and we're going to go with that first, starting with the professional headshot, right? This is obviously probably pretty self-explanatory, right? You want to include your headshot. Your one sheet is often your first opportunity to make a good impression, right? So you want to put a face with your name. But there's a couple things that are important to doing this correctly. The first is you want it to be a current photo. We often talk about Tom in the pre-beard and post-beard, his post-beard era. So his old one sheet from a few years ago had no beard, right? Because he didn't have any facial hair. Now he, and so we want to make sure that marketing and his branding is current with what his current appearance. So if you go through any type of major look changes, like a major hairstyle change or hair color or anything like that, you want to make sure that your headshot looks like you now. And because of that, the theme of our previous discussion was podcast guesting. It is not transactional. It is a building relationship. It is founded on relationship building. And so you have your one sheet, and then you don't want to show up to your interview or your kickoff call with them and look completely different, and they're shocked, right? It will immediately derail the foundation of trust that you're trying to build with them. And then the second component of the headshot is it very intentionally, as you'll see throughout each of these elements, you'll see that everything is very intentionally designed, right? It is a nice, clean, square image. It's not all pretty and feathered out, or it's not alpha. There's no graphic overlay over it. No, nothing like that. It's very straight. And that is because you want to make it, again, going back to the theme of making it easy, you want to make it easy that if you are a guest on their show, that they can easily right-click your image there, save it, and use it in any promotional material for the show. Oftentimes the host will design custom podcast art for when they have a guest on, right? They'll include the guest headshot on that podcast art for that episode. So again, you want to make it easy. If they want to make a change to the headshot and alpha it out or add an overlay, they can do that. But again, you want to make it easy for them to easily grab the image and use it how they need to. And then right below that, the same thing. We have the Tom's Books here. Again, you want to include any book or brand or logo, any course or anything that kind of starts to build that brand affinity for the host and also the listeners, their audience. And again, you want to keep those just simple square images, right? A lot of times people will use like a 3D image of their book where, you can see the binding or the pages, right? Those are great. They serve a purpose, right, in your marketing on your website or social media things. But for the purpose of your one sheet, you just want to leave them as flat images. And that way, again, if they want to copy those images and use them in any promotional material, they can easily do that. And then right below your book or your headshot, you want to put a testimonial in there, right? And you wanted a testimonial that is meaningful for the audience. Now, this is where you might have a couple versions of your one sheet, depending on the type of podcast you're looking to get on, right? Tom has a couple that he will change out depending on the podcast that he is being introduced to. This one here is a quote from Christopher Lochhead. So this is important when Tom is looking at corporate themed podcast or Fortune 500 themed, geared podcast, podcasts who focus on branding and marketing, things like that, because that Christopher Lochhead will be important to that industry, to that niche, right? Another one he'll use is a quote from Dan Miller, who he will use out if he's focusing more on entrepreneurial podcasts. Another one that he'll use oftentimes is a quote from Carrie Wilkerson. This one's good when he's focusing on podcasts that are for speakers, for presenters. Maybe that's like women business owner focused, right? You put a woman there because that will resonate with that audience better. If it's a female hosted podcast, he may use Carrie because, again, it's showing that you are a good match for them and their purpose, their messaging, right? So again, you want to show that you're a good fit for the audience, and that and something with that is the podcast host may not know who you are, but they may know who they probably know who the Christopher Lochhead of their industry is, right? They know who the Carrie Wilkerson of their industry is. So, and that's another reason why, social proof, right? So you want to keep it relevant to the audience and easy for the host to identify you of who you align with. And then below the testimonial is your contact information. And you want to put everything there, all of your contact information, because for one, you want to make it easy for them to contact you. And we all have our preferences for how we communicate. And so you want to lay everything out there so that they can grab the thing that their preference. Another thing is including your phone number. And I know that can probably be kind of intimidating to put your phone number on your one sheet. But we have found it's really important because sometimes the host needs to get a hold of you at the last minute, right? Life happens, emergencies happen. I know one interview, Tom got a text from the host like 5 minutes before their interview because there was a fire emergency outside of his studio. And so there was all this fire trucks and noise and all that. And so he needed to reschedule because it was going to wreck the audio of the interview. So including your phone number is probably a best practice that we do suggest. Another thing is, and this is even surprising for me, is that a lot of times hosts will print out the one sheet, and you kind of don't expect that in this digital age, but they do. So that's why intentionally all of the email and the social media handles, everything is typed out. It's not just an icon. And that way, if they print it, they can still see your handle. They can still find you that way. Those are clickable links within the document, but they're not, they're still typed out. And that there wraps up the left column of the one sheet. And now we're going to move over to the right, where there's quite a bit more text and copy over there. And as you can see, there's different sections there of text, and we're going to walk through what those are and why those are segmented out the way that they are. And so we're going to focus in and zone in here to your name and your headline. This is probably pretty obvious, but you do want to include your name along the top, big bold print. But the key here is using the name that you want to be called, right? Tom's formal name is Thomas, but he does not go by that. And putting your name that you want to be called, if you're William and you go by Bill, put that on there, because it avoids an awkward moment in the interview when you're being called Thomas the whole time and you're like, okay, yeah, but that's not my name. And two, and it builds on that brand affinity. If the audience is listening to you be called Thomas, they're going to think that is a different person than Tom, right? They're not going to make those connections if they see you in other spaces. So you want to use your name that you want to be called there, right next to your headshot, right? Because we're putting a face with a name. And then right below that are your key titles, right? And again, this goes back to making it easy. what do you identify as? What are your titles that you would call yourself? Are you an entrepreneur, an author? Are you a strategist? Are you a consultant? Anything that can immediately let you resonate with the host, that they can say, okay, authors do well with my podcast, right? I am a writer-based podcast. So anything that'll start building those connections between you and their audience. And then right below that is your key focus. And again, this is connecting the dots for them. It may be a little difficult for you to read there, but it's just a short, concise statement that summarizes what you are, your objective, what your message is, what you're teaching and talking about. And this is something that, any presenter or speaker should kind of have these titles for themselves, right? Because you should know the answer to this question. And it quickly answers the who am I and why am I here for the host, and if you're going to align with their audience. And then moving right below that is your bio. Now, it's a biography. It's not War and Peace. You want to make it as concise as possible. And it's just enough info that you're interesting, and identify your expertise, but you're not giving them everything, right? This is your experience, maybe how long you've been in the industry, maybe big names that you've worked with. Some of our clients will, Jeff Bart, he has an extensive background, admirable background of, he's worked in Hollywood for 20 years with, with Disney and ABC and all of these things. And so that's something you want to put there. You want to make it why you're applicable to be on their show and not much else. So you want to leave out a lot of your personal information, right? If I had a one sheet, I wouldn't put on there, I'm a military spouse, I live on an island north of Seattle with our young children, right? Unless it ties directly into my purpose, right? If my goal was to get on podcasts that are for military spouses or for people who live in remote areas or something, then I may want to include that. But otherwise, if it doesn't make sense, then you want to leave it out. This is your professional bio. Leave out the personal stuff. And then right below that is your suggested introduction. Now, this is different from your bio, right? Your bio is telling them about you, your merits, your expertise, your experience. But your suggested intro is, this is written in what we call a rip and read writing style, right? Anytime, if you're presenting on stage, if you're presenting on TV, all hosts will probably have something of, welcome Tiffany to the stage, right? And they'll read off something quick about you. This is just so it's rip and read. So the host can just read this as they bring you onto their show, and they don't have to think about anything. So you want it written in the third person, and you want to be brief, right? Think of it, that funny scene from Anchorman when, they're all newscasters and they put all this gibberish on the screen, right? And they'll just read anything. You want to make it easy that they can read it off and they don't have to think about it. And you want to be brief, right? You don't want 5 minutes of your 30-minute interview to be your introduction. Keep it short and sweet. And again, just give them enough facts and key phrases that teases you and teases what you're about, and starts to create that interest that the audience is going to want to hear more and what you're about to say. And then number 8, this one can be a controversial topic or a point here. And the reason why is these are not questions. So these are topics, not questions. It is overwhelmingly insulting for a host for you to give them your questions, right? This is a conversation. It isn't a rapid fire, them firing off your same 10 questions that you give every podcast host, right? Every interview that you do. For a few reasons. You're insulting their knowledge. This is their show. They know what their audience wants to hear about, and they might drive the conversation in one direction or another. But giving them topics is beneficial because then they can quickly point out things, that then they're using your correct language that you use, right? Tom will often use the big fish don't swim through funnels and whales don't click analogy. That's kind of something specific in his message that he often works into his interviews. The host may not know that, right? So you want to use key phrases, catchphrases that you use, big things that you talk about. But you want to leave it open-ended that they can kind of, at their discretion, drive the interview. And then in coming up with these topics, you want to think what's in it for the host and what's in it for the audience. Does it solve a problem for them? What problems and concerns do they need addressed, right? And again, because this is about, it's talking points, but it's not a script, right? We want to keep it a natural flow. It's a natural conversation, and you're going to want the host to drive that for you. And two, if you send a list of questions, your interviews are going to get very boring very quickly. And then, if audience members, as you build, notoriety and people start listening to your different interviews on your different podcasts, they're going to quickly realize it's all the same thing. You're following the same script. So that's why we want to leave it to topics, key catchphrases, and not questions. And then last, our ninth point here is just the overall layout and design, right? This isn't the most beautifully graphic designed, fancy page, but it serves its purpose and what it's there to do, right? You are designing this with your reader in mind. So you want everything, it's all intentionally squared off. Like we said, the images are squared away. They're easy to grab. If the host is looking how to contact you, that's very specifically right there. If they're looking how to introduce you on the show, that's right there. Everything has its place and its space, and it's easy for the host to quickly not only say yes to your interview, but then during your interview, they can quickly find things and find items. And another thing is the styling. Again, the formatting here. A lot of times we'll see inverse coloring, right? They'll do a dark black background with white font. While that may look aesthetically pretty and pleasing, it can be very frustrating for them if they print out your one sheet and your paper is wet and you've drained their printer of ink because you have that. And then two, when you do those high saturated colors, they start bleeding together and it just doesn't function for its purpose. So again, it's all about keeping it simple and making it easy for the host. And then we have a 10th and a bonus tip here. And this is along the top there next to Tom's name and his titles. And that is his commitment to collaborative promotion. This is a major initiative that we launched last year with all of our guests. And it's something really important because going back to the, podcast interviews are about relationships, not transactions. And you will guest quickly develop a reputation, right? Podcast host, no other podcast host. That was actually the bonus tip in last week's discussion on the secrets to getting booked on your first podcast. Guests build a reputation for being a good guest or a user and abuser. Promoting the interview is a two-way street. And that's why we took the initiative to put that on our guest one sheets who are committed to that promotion. Promoting the interview and spreading the word is not just on the side of the podcast host, right? You need to show that you care about this as well, and that you take this seriously, and that you intend to promote the interview, that you're going to share it on your social media or your blog or with your email list too, because it also that then benefits you're each it's a collaboration. You're each sharing each other's audience, right? You're getting introduced to the show's audience, and then they're also getting exposed to your audience. And that goes back to why it's so important to get on the right podcast, and where the audience and message alignment is matched up. And that is our 9+1 bonus tips for the components to a perfect podcast one sheet. And as promised, we're going to dive into some examples of what not to do. And the theme here is just to keep it stupid simple, right? The old phrasing. These are I just pulled some images. I Google searched podcast one sheet, and this is what came up. And, this is no insult to the people in these one sheets. These are all beautifully designed paid one sheets, but they conflict with what we know that hosts are looking for. And I'm going to make this bigger so you can see that a little better. This one here, this is a beautifully designed one sheet, right? The kudos to the graphic designer or whoever put this together. It's really, it's like a piece of art. But if this probably came across the desk of a host, that is going to be difficult for them to read. There's a lot of empty space. They can't quickly grab John Doe's image here, right? His picture, to use it in any promotional material. You have those squares over to the right side that is reminiscent of, periodic table elements. That probably doesn't mean anything to the host, and it takes up a lot of space that you could have highlighted other attributes. Here's another one, and I'm going to zone into these a little bit better. The one on the left there, just below the name, opens with "About me," right? It isn't about you, unfortunately. And so right away, you're kind of setting the stage as like, look at me and how awesome I am, rather than the narrative of how can I serve your audience? How can I bring value to the show? The example on the right there, we're going back to that inverse copy and background, right? That's that dark brown background with the light text. That can be kind of difficult to read, especially if they're maybe looking on their phone that's, maybe a little smaller, or if they print it out, again, your paper is going to be wet, it's going to bleed, it's going to be fuzzy. It just doesn't do anything. It looks nice, but it doesn't serve its purpose. Here's some more. The one on the left, John, again, his image would be difficult to grab, right? If they wanted to promote his show. He has some graphics over his photo. The copy of his book there at the bottom, it would be difficult for them to grab that for promotional purposes. It's the 3D image. It kind of blends into the same green background, so it would be hard to grab that out. And again, we have a lot of high contrast, bright colors with text. Again, if they print this out, it's going to be all wet and sloppy looking, as well as the one on the right. That headshot, it looks nice, but that would be difficult to use in promotional things. Along the bottom there, the icons, that looks like the contact information. But again, if they print this out, you can't see what it is. You would just have to click the document. So you don't know what those handles are. You don't know what the phone number is until you click the icon. So again, these are some good examples of beautiful documents and pages, but they're not serving their purpose. And here's another one. This looks really great. I see it looks like along the left there, his social proof of who he's worked with. But again, it's taken up a lot of space. He used a lot of space for images, but not a lot about him and his attributes and how he can serve them and serve the show. So again, there's a difference between being pretty, right? These would be perfect in print media, right? In a magazine or something like that, but not for the purpose of it being a one sheet, to make it easy for the podcast host and what they need and what they care about, right? So that's it. That's our examples. So we've walked through the 9 key components of a perfect podcast one sheet. We've shown you some examples of what not to do. And as promised earlier, we're now going to bring on one of our IB team members, Claudia, who does this, who works with the host, but also puts our clients' one sheets together. So she has experience on both sides of the coin there that I really thought she could bring value to today's discussion. So let's bring on Claudia. Hi, Claudia.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am good. Yeah.
Thank you for hopping on with me today. Like I said, I thought you'd be the perfect team member for me to kind of bounce ideas off of, because you do this, right? Both sides.
Yes.
Yeah. Was there anything as I was talking there that you wanted to point out or maybe chime in on?
Yeah, I agree with the fact that I get a lot of media kits from people who have sent out media kits because they have been on big news stations or other shows. Excuse me. But for hosts, most of our hosts are quickly looking at our emails and wanting to get the top components of you. They want to go, okay, this is their experience. This is what they can talk about. Ooh, I haven't covered that topic. That looks fun. That's what I want to focus in on. And I think that's the big difference with our one sheets, that one, our hosts know where to look. And two, we're able to showcase you really well by focusing in on your professional bio about what you bring to the table and your interview topics in a fun way that hosts can look at and go, ooh, I can already repurpose that as the title of the podcast interview, or this is going to be really great for listeners to go, ooh, that's something I definitely want to tune in for.
Right, exactly. It's almost like I boiled down the concentrate of your attributes, right? And your experience. And yeah, that's a good point about the topics. Now that you say that, I made the connection of, you're right. I have oftentimes seen Tom's interviews be the title of the podcast that came from his topics, right? And so again, it's about making it easy for the host. They can grab a quick statement that they're like, that would be a perfect show title that's going to grab attention, that's teasing, right? It teases the audience of like, what does that mean? And I want to learn more about that.
Yeah, for sure. Because a lot of these hosts do things on their own. They are solo hosts. They don't, as you said, they don't have a big team of people doing their marketing or their branding or anything else, because they have businesses too. They do the podcast because it adds to what they're able to give to their clients, to the people they work with. And by making their job even easier, by having really well written interview topics and the bio having so much information that doesn't give everything away, but enough that the host goes, "Ooh, I want to ask about that. How was your time there? How did you do that as a founder here? And why did you move from this career over here?" You don't need to give them everything. Like you said, you don't need a 9-page media kit.
Right.
Send them enough information to go, "I now have questions and I want to ask them because this person is going to bring value to my listeners."
Right. It's just enough to pique their interest. And then I think if you grab their attention, who they do this day in and day out, then they're like, that's definitely going to grab the attention of my audience, right? If I find this interesting, they're really going to find this interesting. Is there any feedback that you've dealt with, because as your role of a podcast relationship manager here, as far as feedback from them of what they're looking for, kind of chiming off like what I talked about with the images or the, just being really like heavily graphically designed and whatnot. Is there anything feedback you've gotten from them directly?
I know that it has to be nice for the host when we send the one sheet and we have a headshot. And then later on, another, like just a standalone headshot is sent to the host. You want that image to match, because if you're looking through your emails, or like you said, if you have printed out the one sheet, you want the headshot that was sent over for their marketing to match, because it might confuse them. Or like the conversation we had as you talked about hair color change, like some of my older photos, I have blonde hair, but now I don't. And it would definitely startle someone if they got on a call with me and they went, "Ooh, that doesn't," and that makes sense. And it does make sense even with Tom, because when I started, it was the beard, no beard. And he was like, "Well, I guess I have a beard now." And it does make sense. And when you're doing this, like Tom has a microphone in his headshot. Not everyone's going to need to, because if you are an investor, sitting in front of a microphone is not your forte.
Right. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I like that you said when you later send on the headshot by it as a standalone item, that it should be the same, right? Because we're all busy, right? So if I'm looking at John Smith to come on my podcast and his image is one thing on his one sheet, and then we're ramping up for the interview and I get a headshot and it's a different image, I'm like, who's this person, right? Like, is this somebody else? Like, I'm confused now. So that is a good point, that it should all match, all a brand affinity, brand alignment.
Mm-hmm. And it's helpful because we send all of in the one sheets, you want your social media to match up too. It's really helpful to have your YouTube link to not just be a string of letters. Take that time to customize your YouTube link to be the same as your Instagram or your Twitter handles or your Facebook. So that, again, it's ease for the host. It's also ease for the listeners, because they're like, "Ooh, I remember their name. I can't quite remember what the company was, but let me look them up." It's a lot easier for people to find you if you have that consistency.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that goes on with a brand alignment, right? Like you said, I may not remember your YouTube channel specifically, but if I know it was Interview Valet, I can Google that, and then all of your things should pop up, all of your social media, your YouTube channels, whatever you may have. So that's a really good point too, is that they should be consistent across your different platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Let's see. This is a question that came through that maybe you can help with, and then I'll chime in on it too, because I think our process and other people's process may be different. Do you have tips for designing the one sheet itself? I showed like our template, our format. Do you have any tips for designing them and putting that content together?
I think there's a difference between one sheets and like sending a resume. You don't want it to be so professional that it comes off just black and white, but I don't think you want it to be too overzealous, which some of the examples you showed with all of these wonderful graphics and this, that's hard to read. It looks great on a website, doesn't transfer as well into having a host be able to easily read it and get information from it. So how we have ours with simple colors, our simple and an easy way to move from left to right to find information is a good way without overloading a host. and also easily printable, because you could print ours in black and white and we wouldn't lose anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's something to be careful of.
Yeah, and it quickly, like ours, dare I say, might look boring compared to the examples I showed, right?
Mhm.
Aesthetically, but it again, it goes back to serving its purpose, right? If the host is sitting there looking at it, either printed or on another screen during your interview, they can quickly scan over and be like, "Oh yeah, I was going to point out, the one conversation away tagline that Tom uses," right? They can quickly identify whatever they're looking for. Everything's just kind of squared off in its own little section. We do ours in house. Our one sheets for our clients, that's a part of the package for all of our clients. We design the one sheet, we customize it with all of our experience, and then what points out their uniqueness and their key attributes. But if you don't have those resources in house, Canva is our fan favorite here. We all love
Mhm.
Canva. If you're doing it yourself, if you're DIYing it, that's probably a good resource. Or outsourcing it to Fiverr or something like that for a graphic designer. I think you could probably get one for like 10, $20, I imagine. Um, and as far as coming up with the content, even uh, you do that, right, for our clients. They'll kind of send you over their information, and you make it all pretty and marketable, right?
Yes, and another thing to keep in mind is that your one sheet is going to change as you change. You don't want it to change every month. It's not a status update, but you do want to make sure that it's kept up to date. You don't want to send the same one sheet you sent out 2 years ago, because your topics have changed. The world has changed. What have you done in the last 2 years? That doesn't necessarily mean you need to change your bio, because that probably hasn't changed much, but your interview topics will have changed. Your logo may have changed. You may have updated it. You may have put out a new book. So don't get so set on, this is my one sheet and it has to stay. Like, it can change, and that's okay. But if you keep a similar format, when you update a interview topic, it's a lot easier, because again, the host can still find it. Or
Mhm.
if you're reaching out to them for a second interview, go, hey, remember me from 5 years ago? I've done all of this in the last 5 years. I really love to come back on and share new knowledge. You already have that relationship with the host, but they can look again and go, oh, okay, I already know where this information should be. And so
Right.
that's really helpful too.
Yeah, we pride ourselves in kind of having our hosts trained, right? To like quickly,
Yeah.
it makes it easy for them, right? We're cutting out all the fluff that
Yeah.
they don't need to worry about. I like that you said too of updating it, not every month, but maybe every year or two. A lot of our clients will come on; they'll start with us to just promote their brand or their company, right? Their business, and then down the road, they're promoting a book now or a new program or a product or something. And so then they tweak it just enough that it's more zoned in to focus on the book and their attributes as an author and why you should read my book rather than their overall brand, right, and marketing.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's a good balance too. And we do know that a lot of times if a guest does really well on a show, there is opportunities for a second interview down the road, right? As like maybe they evolve and they change, that they'll come back around because if their audience and their listeners really like you and enjoyed that episode, they'll want to bring you back, right? To have a follow up and then that too shows the host that like I've evolved in 2 years. I've learned more, I
Mhm.
had lots of great stuff 2 years ago, and now I have even better stuff now today. So
Yeah.
yeah, great stuff. Do you have anything else to add or that I missed or um, experience anything like that?
I think the biggest thing is trying not to put everything about you on the one sheet. Less is generally better, and it's all you need. You don't need to overload. You'll have that opportunity to speak all about what you know, who your company is, what you can provide for the listeners, and why you add value. You can do that in the interview.
Mhm.
If a host, I even sometimes long emails, I know that sometimes we're all busy, all of us. And if you get a very, very busy and dense one sheet, you might not read all of it. You're going to lose some of it. put the big stuff in, and really what you want to talk about. You might not need to share everything you've done in your 30 years, 40 years of experience, but you do want to showcase what you want to talk about and what your focus is for being on interviews.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't need to be everything about you, because you'll have time during your interview if there's something cool about you that you want to point out, or your experience, or one of your top amazing clients, something like that. You'll have time for that in the interview. So really, this is selling yourself, right? And not, well, okay, let me correct that. Not selling yourself, selling how you can bring value, right? And how you can serve the host and their show and their listeners. So
yes,
lots of great stuff. Thank you, Claudia, for jumping on.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Today.
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate it. I can talk about the conceptual part of it, but it's really you guys on the team that do this day in, day out. You're on the front lines. You get the direct interaction with both the clients and the host and their feedback. So thank you for sharing those insights with me.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Claudia, for hopping on. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up here. As I said earlier, this is kind of a mini series that we're doing, where each week it's kind of building onto itself. Last week, we talked about the 9 secrets to getting on your first podcast. Part of that discussion was you're having a professional one sheet. So it seemed natural that would we would lead into that today. So the next part of that is, okay, you've introduced yourself to a host. Now, how do you get on the show, right? And then when you get on the show, do you sound good? So next week, we're going to share some behind the scenes of showing up like the professional that you are, with having the right podcast guest equipment. Again, tried and true, trial and error over our experience and time of what we found. And then the following week, we're going to talk about the podcast interview welcome page. And so we look forward to that discussion. We'll be here same time, same place next week here on LinkedIn Live. And we'll see you guys then. Take care.